How do we diagnose Achilles tendinopathy? Well, first and foremost, I think it's really important to understand there's no gold standard for ruling in Achilles tendinopathy. Okay. What I mean by that is that in some studies, they'll use an MRI or an ultrasound or arthroscopic surgery to confirm whether or not you have a specific injury or pathology, right? So if I have a labral tear, I open up the shoulder and I look and I say, yep, the labrum's torn, that's your gold standard right there. So the problem with tendinopathies is that we know the large majority of these are going to be asymptomatic. So if you take an MRI or an ultrasound of your Achilles tendon, you have pain in that area, it's a little tough for us to know whether or not the Achilles is actually the source or what's giving you your pain by the Achilles, right? So what that means is that sensitivities and specificities of certain tests really aren't going to mean much because they have to be compared to a gold standard, which we don't have. Okay. That being said, how can we diagnose Achilles tendinopathy? What do we think are the best tests to kind of rule in or rule out Achilles tendon problems? So, first and foremost, localized pain in the Achilles, right? So, basically, the pain is on the Achilles tendon. The next piece is that you have pain with increased loading. So, if I do a double legged calf raise, it hurts a little bit. Then I do a single leg calf raise, it hurts even more. And if I jump on that leg, it hurts even greater, right? That's a sign that you've got an Achilles tendon issue. Okay. And the last piece is, or excuse me, the next piece is pain on palpation. So if I squeeze the Achilles tendon, it should hurt and reproduce those same symptoms the patient's talking about. Okay. And lastly, you may have some tendon thickening. And what's important to understand is that some folks will have Achilles tendon pain, but they don't have thickening yet, just because tendinopathy occurs over the course of time. It's going to start with very minimal thickening and increase over the course of time, right? Getting ahead of myself, but the thickness of the tendon does not necessarily influence your prognosis, right? So if you have a super thick tendon, I'm not like getting super scared and saying, wow, you're never going to get better. Look how thick that thing is, right? So you can have a lot of pain, a very thin tendon. You can have very little tendon and a very thick tendon over the course of time, right? If you guys are looking for a video where I show you how to go through this diagnosis of Achilles tendinopathy, I made one, right? So go ahead and click on the link. I'll put it right up here, okay? And if you're watching this on a podcast version, then just head over to the show notes and I'll put the link in the show notes for that, okay? The other pieces to think about is that we can have an insertional Achilles tendinopathy. We can have a mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy. And what that means is that an insertional Achilles tendinopathy is closer to the insertion where the tendon attaches to the calcaneus, right? And that's defined as insertional is within 2 centimeters from the insertion of the tendon, right? So basically right on the back of the heel. And a mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy is going to be 2 to 7 centimeters above the insertion, right, of the tendon. So this is important because the theory is that in an insertional Achilles tendinopathy, when I go into end-range dorsiflexion, I am stretching the Achilles tendon against the calcaneus, right? And we have limited research to show that when you're trying to get better from insertional Achilles tendinopathy, patients tend to do better with a calf raise program where you start at neutral or on a floor, as opposed to doing a calf raise off a step when you go into end-range dorsiflexion. Again, the thought process being is that if you have irritation at the insertion of the Achilles tendon, then when you go into end-range dorsiflexion, it stretches the tendon across the calcaneus and irritates the Achilles tendon, right? So that's the reason why we would differentiate between insertional versus mid-portion. And the other thing to keep in mind is that most of the research on Achilles tendinopathy is on mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy. So take some of these recommendations with a grain of salt if you're working with insertional patients, okay? Let's talk about some differential diagnosis of Achilles tendinopathy. So if you have pain around the Achilles, there's a chance you might not be dealing with a standard Achilles tendinopathy. So what do we have to be on the lookout for? Well, the first one is enthesitis, okay? Now, if someone has a history of some sort of rheumatic disease, psoriatic disease, get you thinking maybe this is not your garden variety Achilles tendinopathy. If you have suspicion of that, you refer out, okay? You could also have a tendon xanthoma, right? And if there's a family history of high cholesterol or cardiovascular disease at a young age, or just high LDL values, that's what you might be dealing with. It may not be the Achilles tendinopathy, right? I think the big thing to keep in mind is if you think that it's something different than Achilles tendinopathy, where someone's not progressing as they should over the course of time, and we'll talk about how they should progress over the course of time, then you just refer out. Okay. Piece of cake. Nice and easy to do. So, should you use imaging for Achilles tendinopathy? All right. So, in the Achilles, the preferred diagnosis is going to come from ultrasound imaging. Okay. If you don't have access to ultrasound imaging, then MRI is probably your next best option. However, ultrasound works well and it's cheaper. MRI is more expensive, right? So, in the Dutch paper that we're referring to here, only 55% of researchers actually use any sort of imaging in order to come up with a diagnosis. Okay. So, kind of mixed in terms of whether or not you need imaging to rule in Achilles tendinopathy. Now, going back to this ICON symposium, the International Scientific Tendinopathy Symposium, only a quarter of experts felt imaging was necessary for diagnosing tendinopathy, right? So, when should you use imaging? It's used when you have uncertainty about the diagnosis of Achilles tendinopathy, where there's some sort of abnormal progression of symptoms over the course of time. Okay. The other piece, and I talked about this earlier, is that thickening can be absent in some cases. So if you're using imaging to rule in a tendinopathy and you're not noticing much thickening, right, within the image, it might lead you to believe there's not a tendinopathy. However, the tendinopathy might not be very advanced at this point. Okay. So when you're looking at an image, how do you actually rule in that Achilles tendinopathy? Okay. So if we're talking about mid-portion Achilles tendinopathy, the imaging should show thickening of the tendon, should also show altered echogenicity on ultrasound and altered signal intensity on MRI. Okay. The other thing you'll see is a presence of Doppler flow. Okay. And I spoke about this previously, but basically you start to see flow in tendons when there's tendinopathy. Okay. And this is due to this neovascularization. So now we have more vessels within the tendon that are now having some flow, right, of substances through there. Okay. And here's the thing. We have no research to show the amount of imaging findings reflecting prognosis. Okay. And this is kind of cool, right? So basically, if you have a really thick tendon, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're less likely to have a positive prognosis over the course of time. All right. And the other thing that's kind of cool is you don't need imaging to have success with your treatment. Okay. And that's important for physical therapists to hear, because if you have someone come in and you suspect that they have Achilles tendinopathy, you can get them better without an image. Okay. And you can let your patients know that you don't need imaging. Okay. If things are not progressing, yeah, let's do it. But I don't think you need this in order to proceed over the course of time. Right. So here's what I want you to do next, guys. If you enjoyed this video so far, I have an entire course. It's free. It's called the Fitness Pain-Free Mini Course. And we go over 3 lessons going to help you take a lot of this information that we went over so far and put it into practice. The first lecture is called Why We Need a Better System. So first and foremost, the way we treat fitness individuals, all right, athletic people in the gym from a physical therapy perspective is pretty much broke, okay? So we need a better system to serve the folks that are in the gym that get hurt, they want to get back to training, all right? Lecture number 2 is called 7 Reasons Why People Get Hurt in the Gym. And essentially, we have to know the reasons why people get hurt in the gym so we can keep them safe in the future, right? And when they get hurt, we have to know why and how to get them back to training in the gym. Okay, so a thorough understanding of this is very, very important. I actually have a really cool infographic that goes along with this lecture that you get for free as well. And lastly, we go over a case study of how to get someone out of pain and back to training. So these principles are all phenomenal, but we don't actually put it together and you don't understand how to create a program to get people back in the gym and keep them safe for the long term, then we lose, right? So I'll put a link in the show notes for this. It's a Fitness Pain-Free Mini Course. Definitely check this out.